I had not even finished unpacking when they arrived. 3 weeks in the house, and already the walls were beginning to carry the shape of my life. The smell of fresh paint lingered in the hallway, mixed with the faint scent of coffee grounds that clung to the kitchen. I had spent my evenings sanding down floorboards, scrubbing cabinets until my arms ached, learning which window stuck in the morning and which faucet needed coaxing before it gave me water. It was not perfect. The roof creaked when the wind picked up and the front steps slanted a little too far to the left. But for the first time in my life, it was mine. Mine without an asterisk. Mine without anyone hovering over my shoulder asking for something in return. I was in the living room that evening, folding a blanket and thinking about whether I should finally hang a picture above the couch, when I heard it. The sound of too many footsteps at once, the slap of sneakers against wood, laughter that did not belong to this street. My chest tightened. I froze in place, holding the blanket like a shield. Then the doorbell rang twice in quick succession, and before I could move, a voice pierced the thin barrier of the door. "Kayla, open up." It was my mother, Isabel. Her voice carried the kind of brightness that was never natural, a rehearsed cheerfulness that always came before she asked for something. I opened the door slowly, hoping maybe I was imagining things, but there they stood. My brother Miguel in front, his sunglasses still perched on his face even though the sun had slipped behind the rooftops. Behind him was Alina with the baby pressed to her hip, 2 other kids crowding her legs, already restless. And my parents Isabel and Robert stood like bookends, smiling as if they had been expected, as if I had invited them. The shock rooted me to the doorway. I had never given them my new address. I had not spoken to them in months, yet here they were, assembled on my porch like a parade that had chosen me as its destination. Miguel adjusted his sunglasses and looked around the porch as though appraising a property. His oldest son leaned forward and pressed his nose against the front window, leaving a smear before darting back. Alina smiled, polite but thin, the kind of smile she wore when she wanted to appear gracious while quietly judging. My mother stepped past me without pause, her perfume hitting me like a wave of old memories. "Look at this place," she said. "Kayla, you really did well for yourself." It was not praise, it was evaluation. My father nodded once, quiet as always, his eyes already wandering as if avoiding mine. The kids scattered instantly, running down the hallway, opening doors, shouting about which room they wanted. Alina wandered toward the kitchen, bouncing the baby gently, humming as though mapping out where her furniture would go. Miguel followed, his hands in his pockets, gaze scanning the ceilings and the baseboards like an inspector. I stood frozen, the weight of the blanket still in my hands, the silence inside me louder than their chatter. This was not a visit. Visits came with phone calls, texts, or even a knock that waited for permission. This was an entrance, a decision already made. My chest began to throb with the familiar rhythm of old anxiety. A younger version of me flashed through my mind. 11 years old, standing in our childhood kitchen while Miguel threw a remote at my shoulder. The bruise lasted a week. I was grounded for yelling while he was forgiven because boys will be boys. My mother told me to stop being dramatic. My father stared out the window and said nothing. The echo of that silence filled the room now as I watched my family claim space in my home. Miguel turned toward me, his mouth tilting into a half smile that never reached his eyes. "Nice place," he said. "Must feel good." I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell him how many nights I had slept in the back of a rusty RV, how many showers I had taken at gyms where no one knew my name, how many meals I had eaten cold because there was no power to heat them. I wanted to tell him that every inch of this house had been earned with blood and bone. Instead, I said nothing, because deep down I already knew. This was the beginning of something. I had always known that one day they would try to return, not with affection, not with apology, but with entitlement. And here they were, already moving through the rooms, their voices loud enough to drown out mine. They stayed for nearly an hour. Long enough for Alina to comment on the generous kitchen space, long enough for Isabel to frown at the dust on the mantel, long enough for the children to pick their favorite corners. When they finally left, Miguel gave me a look that was almost casual, like he had placed a marker on a map. "We will come back soon," he said, as though the decision was his to make. The door shut behind them, but the silence was heavy, pressing against my chest until I could barely breathe. I leaned against the wall and stared at the lock, at the knob they had touched with their hands. My house suddenly felt smaller, fragile, like it could slip through my fingers at any moment. I told myself it was mine. I told myself I had earned it. But beneath the words, a seed of dread had already been planted, and I knew seeds like that did not stay small for long. I tried to sleep that night, but the house groaned around me. Every creak in the floor sounded like footsteps, every flicker of light from the street lamps painted shadows that looked too much like silhouettes. I pulled the blanket to my chin and whispered to myself that I was safe, that I was alone, that they could not come back without permission. But my own voice sounded unconvincing in the dark. In the morning, I walked through the rooms they had touched. The fingerprints on the glass, the scuff on the hallway wall where one of the kids had kicked his shoes off, the faint smell of Alina's perfume lingering in the kitchen. My home felt invaded even though they were gone. I opened the back door and stepped onto the porch, staring at the RV parked at the edge of the yard. For years, that had been my shelter. A bed barely long enough for my body, a fridge that failed when the nights got too hot, a roof that leaked in storms. I had survived inside that metal shell. And now, standing in front of my house, I realized they had seen it too. They knew I could live there if I had to. And that thought chilled me more than the wind. That afternoon, I went back inside and forced myself to open the boxes I had left untouched. I hung one picture on the wall above the couch. It was a simple photograph of a river, something I had bought at a flea market years ago. But it anchored the room, gave me proof that this space belonged to me. I whispered again that it was mine, but the words still trembled. I tried to distract myself the next day by scrubbing the counters until they gleamed. I turned the radio on loud enough to drown out my thoughts, but nothing worked. The memory of them wandering through the house clung to me like dust I could not sweep away. Every time I opened a cabinet, I imagined Alina's eyes judging whether it was spacious enough for her dishes. Every time I stepped into the hallway, I heard the echo of children's laughter bouncing against the walls. The house felt unsettled, like a stranger had left a window open and let the cold air seep in. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee gone lukewarm, staring at the grain of the wood, and I asked myself a question I had been avoiding. Why now? Why, after years of silence, did they suddenly appear at my door? Miguel had never called when I graduated. He had not written when I posted about the jobs I lost, the nights I spent living in that battered RV. Isabel had not sent a single message during the worst of it, not even when I swallowed my pride and called to ask for help. Their absence had been so complete, it was almost like I had stopped existing in their world. So why now? The answer came with a clarity that made my stomach twist. The photo. The one I had posted on social media 3 weeks earlier. Just a simple picture of the porch steps and the keys in my hand, captioned with a single word, home. I had not given them the address. I had not even tagged the location. But Alina had always been good at finding things online. A search here, a connection there, and suddenly the house that was supposed to be my refuge was no longer hidden. The thought made my throat tight. I realized that by celebrating my victory, I had also exposed it. The walls I thought were mine alone had cracks I had not noticed, and through them, my family had slipped in. That evening, I sat on the porch with the porch light glowing above me. The street was quiet, the air cool, and the RV crouched at the edge of the yard like an old animal waiting to be useful again. I remembered nights when I had curled up inside it with a blanket pulled tight around me, listening for footsteps outside, praying no one would knock. Back then, the RV was both prison and salvation. I told myself it was temporary, that one day I would step into a real house and lock the door behind me. And now, here I was, and still the fear had followed me. Sleep came in fragments that night. Every sound woke me, every shift of the wind against the siding. In one dream, I saw Miguel standing in the hallway holding a set of keys that looked like mine. In another, Isabel walked through the front door carrying grocery bags, setting them on the counter as if she lived here. I woke with my heart racing, sweat damp on my forehead, the blanket twisted around my body like a rope. By the third morning, I decided to force normalcy into the house. I cooked breakfast, eggs, and toast, something simple but grounding. I opened the curtains wide to let the sunlight in. I walked each room, touching the walls, reminding myself this was my space. I whispered the words out loud. This is mine. It felt ridiculous, but I needed to hear it. I needed the house to hear it. Still, when I stepped outside to water the patch of grass near the fence, I could not shake the image of Miguel's half-smile, the one he had given me at the door. A smile that carried no gratitude, no joy, only claim. He had looked at the house not as a guest, but as someone who believed it was already his. I remembered being 17, standing in the kitchen of our old home, my backpack slung over one shoulder, the weight of a few notebooks and the last of my savings inside. Isabel had told me not to come back until I had direction. Her words had cut so sharply I carried them for years, but I left anyway, walking out the door without looking back. Miguel had been sitting on the couch playing video games, barely glancing up as I disappeared. That was the last night I lived under their roof. Since then, I had pieced together a life with scraps. Jobs that vanished without warning, couches that belonged to friends who could not host me forever, nights spent listening to the hum of laundromat outlets as I charged my phone. Through it all, I carried one thought like a torch. One day I would have a place that no one could take from me. And now, with their sudden arrival, I realized they had sensed that torch too. They had seen its glow and come to claim its warmth. The following weekend, I went to a hardware store and bought a new deadbolt. I installed it myself, hands trembling as I drilled the screws into the frame. The click of the lock sliding into place should have felt like security, but instead it sounded like a challenge, as though I had built a barrier that would be tested. That night, I sat on the couch with the lights dimmed, staring at the shadows stretching across the ceiling. My phone buzzed once with a message from an old friend asking how the new house felt. I typed back quickly. "It feels good," I wrote. "It feels like mine." Then I set the phone down and closed my eyes, trying to believe my own words. But deep inside, beneath the layers of paint and wood and optimism, I knew the truth. The house was mine only as long as I could defend it, and something in the way Miguel had looked at me told me the defense would not be easy. When I finally drifted to sleep, the porch light was still on. It glowed through the curtains, spilling into the living room, a small reminder that the world outside was waiting. I told myself it was just light, but part of me feared it was a beacon, guiding them back, promising that the door was never fully closed. It took a few days before they returned. I told myself maybe the visit had been a fluke, that Isabel had pushed everyone into the car on some impulsive whim, but deep down I knew better. My family never arrived anywhere without intention. It was a Sunday afternoon when the knock came again. I had been sitting on the floor surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, sifting through old notebooks and receipts, the relics of a life spent moving too often. I thought about ignoring the sound, pretending I was not home, but the knock came again, louder this time, followed by Miguel's voice. "Kayla, it is us." My chest tightened. I opened the door and there they were again, lined up like the week before. Miguel in front, Alina behind him with the baby, the other two kids fidgeting on the steps. Isabel smiled the way she did when she thought she was about to convince me of something. Robert stood quietly, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his silence already an answer. This time, they did not wait for an invitation. They walked in as if the last visit had set a precedent. I stood there holding the doorknob, the air around me heavy with the smell of Alina's perfume and the sugary scent of the snacks the children clutched in their hands. Miguel took a seat at the kitchen table, leaning back in the chair like it was already his. He looked around the room once more, slow and deliberate, before fixing his eyes on me. "This place is really great," he said. "Bigger than I thought." I did not answer. I busied myself with the coffee machine, though I had no intention of making any. He cleared his throat, glancing at Alina before continuing. "So we have been talking, and honestly it just makes sense." I turned to face him, bracing for whatever shape his words would take. "We are a family of 5, Miguel said, his voice casual but firm. "It has been hard cramming into Mom and Dad's place, especially with the baby. And your house is perfect. Close to my work, close to schools." He paused, watching me carefully. "I figured maybe we could stay here for a while. Just until we get on our feet." Alina smiled then, her expression sugar-sweet but her eyes sharp. "We would take good care of it," she added quickly. "We could even help with groceries and all." The room seemed to tilt beneath me. My grip on the counter tightened until my knuckles whitened. I searched for words, but none came. Miguel leaned forward, lowering his voice as if he were offering a compromise. "And you already know how to live light. You have that camper in the yard. It would be just like old times for you. You can set yourself up there again, no problem." The suggestion hit me like a blow. For a moment the room dissolved and I was back in that camper, 17 years old, clutching a blanket to keep out the cold. Nights spent listening to footsteps outside, praying no one would knock. Mornings waking to the ache in my back from the thin mattress. The smell of damp fabric in winter, the sweat of summer nights when the tiny fridge failed and spoiled everything I had. That camper was not freedom, it was survival, and now Miguel was asking me to step back inside as if it were a casual favor. I stared at him, my mouth dry, words trapped in my throat. Isabel stood behind him, her arms folded, her face unreadable. Robert stared at the floor. Alina bounced the baby gently, her smile never faltering. "It would be temporary," Miguel said again. "You will hardly notice we are here." I wanted to laugh. How could I not notice? Every inch of this house was hard-won. Every corner told a story of nights I had thought I would not survive. And now he wanted to fill it with his noise, his children, his life, while pushing me back into the box I had once clawed my way out of. But still, I said nothing. Because I knew if I spoke too soon, if I showed the depth of my anger, they would twist it into selfishness, into cruelty. That was the way it had always been. Miguel's tantrums were passion. My resistance was disrespect. His needs were urgent. Mine were indulgent. So I stood silent, my pulse racing, while Miguel leaned back again with a satisfied smile as though my quiet was consent. "We should go soon," Alina said finally, adjusting the baby's blanket. "But thank you, Kayla. This is going to mean so much for the kids." The words lodged in my chest like stones. She had spoken as if the decision had already been made, as if my voice had no role in it. When they left an hour later, the air inside the house felt heavier than before. I closed the door behind them and pressed my forehead against the wood, my breath shallow. The silence that followed was not relief. It was dread. I walked to the back window and stared at the RV again. Its dented metal sides caught the fading light, the same way they had once caught rain and heat and fear. Miguel's words echoed in my head, "You already know how to live light." I clenched my fists until my nails bit into my palms. This house was mine. I had bled for it, cried for it, clawed my way toward it. And yet in their eyes, I was still the girl who could be pushed aside, the one who could make herself small so Miguel could take up more space. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after dark, the lamp above buzzing faintly. I did not touch my dinner. I just stared at the wood grain beneath my hands and thought about the patterns of my life. Over and over again, I had been told to step aside, to let Miguel through, to give him the best peace while I made do with what was left. And over again, I had obeyed, because fighting never changed the outcome. But this was not a toy, not a meal, not a fleeting childhood favor. This was my home, and if I gave it up, even for a night, I knew I would never get it back. I did not sleep well after that second visit. My mind replayed every word Miguel had spoken, every look exchanged between Alina and Isabel, every silence my father offered in place of support. The house creaked with the weight of their presence even though they were gone. I kept seeing Miguel leaning back in the chair, smiling like a man who had already signed the deed. I tossed and turned, the ceiling above me shifting between shadow and light, and when morning came, my body felt bruised from a fight I had not yet had. I tried to keep busy, telling myself I would not let them take more than they already had. I cleaned the porch, washed the windows, even fixed the squeaky hinge on the bathroom door. Each small act was a claim, but no matter how many things I mended, the unease only grew. On Tuesday, Isabel called. The sound of her voice on my phone made my stomach clench. She did not ask how I was. She never did. Instead, she spoke with the same bright tone she had used at my door. "Miguel and Alina are so grateful," she said. "They were saying how generous you are. Generous, as if I had given them something already." I held the phone tightly, pressing my lips together until they hurt. "Mom, I never agreed to anything," I said finally. There was a pause on the other end, the kind of pause Isabel used when deciding which angle would work best. Then she laughed lightly. "Oh, Kayla, you always make things sound so dramatic. It is just family. Of course you will help." Her certainty was worse than any argument. It was not a question, not a plea. It was a statement of fact, one that left no room for refusal. I ended the call quickly, my hands shaking. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone across the room, but instead I sat on the couch staring at the blank television screen. For a moment I saw my own reflection, pale and tired, and behind it the faint outline of the house that was slipping from my grip. That evening I walked out to the RV. I ran my hands along the dented sides, the metal cool under my palms. Inside it still smelled faintly of dust and oil, even though I had not slept there in months. The thin mattress was folded against the wall, the small fridge unplugged. It looked ready, as if waiting for me to crawl back inside. I shivered and stepped away quickly, shutting the door with a snap. The following day, Alina sent a message. A cheerful note about how excited the kids were, how they could not wait to have a backyard to play in, how it would be wonderful for everyone. She added a smiley face at the end, as though her words were harmless. I did not reply. By Thursday, I could barely eat. My body carried the tension of someone expecting an attack. I checked the locks twice before bed. I left the porch light on. I tried to remind myself that no one could simply move into my home without permission. But the truth was they already had in their minds. And once my family decided something belonged to them, they found ways to make it real. One night as I sat by the window, I remembered a Thanksgiving long ago. Miguel had spilled cranberry sauce on the carpet. Isabel had scolded me for not watching him, even though I had been across the room. She had pressed a rag into my hand and told me to clean it. Miguel had smirked as I scrubbed the stain, and later, when relatives arrived, Isabel told them I had made the mess. That was the pattern. His mistakes became my responsibilities, his wants became my sacrifices. And now history was repeating, only this time the mess was an entire house. By Friday, I felt the weight of inevitability pressing down on me. I could almost hear Miguel's voice in the walls, see Alina's framed photos already hanging where mine should be. I told myself I would not let it happen. I told myself I would fight. But I had been trained since childhood to fold under their demands, to swallow my protests, to step aside. Fighting was foreign, a muscle I had never been allowed to build. That night, I made a decision. I stood in the kitchen, hands trembling, and whispered to myself that if they tried again, I would not be silent. I would not make myself small. This house was mine, and I would not give it away. Still, when I crawled into bed, fear gnawed at me, because knowing what I should do and believing I could do it were two different things. And as sleep pulled me under, I heard Miguel's voice echo in my mind. You already know how to live light. It was a week later when the invasion began. I had left work late that day, tired from hours of repetitive tasks and the long drive home. The sun was dropping behind the rooftops as I turned onto my street. At first, I noticed nothing unusual, only the rows of quiet houses and the flicker of porch lights coming on one by one. But then I saw it. A moving truck, parked crookedly against the curb in front of my house. Its tailgate was open, boxes stacked inside, and Miguel's van sat beside it like a guard dog. My heart slammed against my ribs. For a moment, I thought I had turned down the wrong street, that I had mistaken another house for mine. But no, it was my driveway, my front steps, and strangers were walking in and out of my door carrying boxes. I pulled into the driveway slowly, the weight of disbelief pressing on my chest. My headlights caught Miguel as he emerged from the house holding a lamp under one arm. He squinted against the light, then raised his hand in a lazy wave. "You are late," he said, as though I had been expected to arrive at this exact moment. I sat frozen behind the wheel, gripping it so tightly my hands ached. From inside, I heard the sound of a television blaring cartoons, children shouting, Alina's voice calling instructions. My house sounded like theirs already. I finally forced myself to move, slamming the door of the car harder than I meant to. My feet felt heavy as I walked toward the porch. The front door was wide open, the welcome mat pushed to the side under a pile of shoes. The air inside carried the smell of fast food and baby powder, so thick it made my stomach turn. Alina appeared in the doorway, her smile wide and triumphant, the baby balanced on her hip. She leaned forward as if greeting me after a long trip. "It is happening," she said sweetly. "We are so glad you are letting us stay." Her tone made it sound like a favor I had already granted, a promise I had never made. She turned back inside before I could speak, her laughter mingling with the noise of the television. I stepped into the house on legs that felt unsteady. The hallway was cluttered with boxes marked toys, kitchen, and clothes. The living room rug was already buried under action figures and crumpled paper. Miguel set the lamp down casually, then disappeared into another room, humming to himself. I tried to breathe, but the air felt stolen from my lungs. This was no longer a visit. This was a takeover. And then I saw it. On the kitchen counter lay a stack of papers held down by a chipped mug. The sight caught my attention because I knew every object in this house, every corner I had carefully arranged, and those papers did not belong. I reached for them with a hand that trembled. The top sheet was a lease agreement, my name typed neatly at the top. My signature sprawled across the bottom, but it was not my signature. The letters leaned the wrong way, the loops too wide, the spelling of my middle name wrong. Yet to an untrained eye it might have passed. My stomach dropped, the edges of the paper cutting into my skin as I gripped it too tightly. This was the twist I had not expected. Not only had they decided to move in, they had come armed with a document to prove it. A forged lease. Evidence ready for anyone who dared to question. I staggered back, the paper shaking in my hands. Miguel reappeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He noticed the lease in my grip but said nothing, only raised his eyebrows as if daring me to challenge it. In that moment, the walls of the house seemed to close around me. I remembered birthdays where Miguel's gifts filled the table while mine was a grocery store cake. I remembered Isabel's voice telling me not to make a fuss, not to ruin the evening, not to draw attention. I remembered Robert staring out the window, silent, while Miguel shoved me down the stairs and called it play. The same silence stretched between us now, filling the house like smoke. Alina's laughter floated from the living room. The children shouted about who got which bedroom. Isabel's voice drifted down the hall, cheerful and commanding, already deciding where things should go. My father's low murmur followed, quiet as always, and I stood there, holding a piece of paper that declared I did not belong in my own home. I wanted to scream, to tear the lease into pieces and throw it in Miguel's face, but my body betrayed me. I stood frozen, my chest heaving, while Miguel slipped past me carrying another box. He did not look at me, not directly. He did not need to. The message was clear. We belong here, you do not. The sound of cartoons grew louder, drowning out the frantic beat of my heart. I stumbled back toward the porch, the forged lease still clutched in my hand. Outside, the air was cool, sharp in my lungs. I pressed the paper against my chest as though holding evidence of a crime, which in truth I was. For a long moment I just stood there staring at the truck, the boxes, the open door of my house spilling light into the evening. I felt like a stranger on my own lawn, a trespasser watching someone else's life unfold. I knew then that silence would no longer protect me. It never had. The only question left was whether I could find my voice before they erased me completely. I stood on the porch longer than I realized, clutching that forged lease so tightly it wrinkled in my hands. The night air was cold, brushing against my skin like ice water, but I barely felt it. Inside, the television blared and boxes thudded against the floor as though the house had always belonged to them. I wanted to walk back in and throw them all out, but fear tangled around my ribs, holding me in place. When I finally stepped back through the door, Miguel was setting up a small table in the corner of the living room. He glanced at me briefly, then continued working as though I were an unwelcome guest in my own home. Elena emerged from the hallway, hair pulled back, cheeks flushed. She looked at me with exaggerated warmth. "You will see how good this will be for all of us," she said. "The kids will have room to run around, and you will not feel so lonely anymore." Lonely. As if my solitude were a flaw waiting to be fixed, as if the quiet I had fought to earn was a problem only they could solve. My mother appeared next, carrying a bag of folded linens as though she were preparing a guest room. She smiled at me with the same false brightness I had heard on the phone. "This is for the best, Kayla. You will understand once everything settles." Her tone dripped with finality, the way she used to speak when she decided what clothes I would wear or which chores I would finish before school. The kind of voice that did not invite argument, only obedience. My father trailed behind her with another box. He avoided my eyes, as always. His silence was so practiced it had become its own language, one that told me he had already chosen his side by choosing nothing at all. I tried to speak, but my throat closed. The lease weighed heavy in my hand, proof of their deceit, but still the words stuck. My mind flashed with images of the past, the times I had tried to defend myself only to be told I was overreacting, selfish, cruel. Every protest had been twisted until I was the villain. And here I was again, trapped in the same loop, the same house of mirrors where nothing I said would be reflected back as truth. I backed into the kitchen, clutching the paper. Miguel followed casually, leaning against the counter as if he owned it. He looked at me with an expression that was almost kind, but underneath it pulsed the certainty of possession. "You should not worry so much," he said. "We are family. This will all make sense soon." He gestured toward the paper in my hand, his voice dropping to a lower register. "And that is official now." The word sent a jolt through me. Official. As if a forgery could overwrite my blood, my sweat, the years of struggle that had carved this house into existence. My vision blurred for a moment, anger so sharp it made my head pound. I wanted to shout, to call him what he was, a liar, a thief, a coward, but all I managed was a whisper. "This is not yours." He tilted his head, almost amused. "We will see." The casual cruelty in his tone nearly buckled my knees. I turned away, unable to look at him any longer. My hands shook as I shoved the forged lease into a drawer, hiding it like contraband. I needed time, I told myself. Time to think, to plan, to decide whether I had the strength to fight. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. Elena fed the children at my kitchen table as though it had always been theirs. Isabel hummed while arranging linens in a room I had not yet furnished. Miguel carried box after box, filling corners with his presence. Robert sat quietly in the living room, his eyes glued to the television, pretending nothing unusual was happening. By the time they finally left, the house looked different. My hallway was cluttered with forgotten shoes, my counters smeared with fingerprints, my air thick with their scent. The silence that followed their departure was not relief, it was devastation. I collapsed onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. My heart pounded with fear and fury, but beneath it all was something worse, the familiar pull of surrender. I had spent my childhood yielding space to Miguel, bending myself into smaller and smaller shapes until I barely existed. That instinct lived in me still, whispering that maybe it would be easier to give in, to step aside, to let them have what they wanted. But then I remembered the RV. I remembered nights when I had lain awake inside it, whispering to myself that I would never beg again, never let anyone push me back into that box. I had promised myself that one day I would have something that was only mine, and now that promise was being tested. I stood slowly, wiping the tears from my face. My body trembled, but my resolve began to harden. I opened the drawer and pulled out the forged lease, smoothing the wrinkles with shaking hands. I studied the false signature, the clumsy loops and crooked slant, my name stolen and twisted. This was not just betrayal. It was a crime. I folded the paper carefully and tucked it into a folder, sliding it under a stack of bills where no one would think to look. My hands were still shaking, but a new thought had begun to form in the back of my mind. For the first time, I considered the possibility of calling the police. The idea felt terrifying, almost impossible. But as I stood in the silence of my invaded home, I knew something had shifted. They had crossed a line that could not be ignored. I turned off the lights one by one, moving through the house in darkness until only the glow of the porch light remained. I stood at the door, staring at that light, wondering if it was a beacon calling them back or a warning telling them to stay away. Either way, I left it on. I knew they would return, and next time I had to be ready. The silence after they left did not last. It never did. 2 days later, I came home from work and found their van already in the driveway again. My stomach dropped the moment I turned the corner and saw it there, parked at an angle like it belonged. The front door was ajar, the television inside blaring so loudly I could hear it from the street. I parked at the curb and sat gripping the wheel, trying to steady my breathing. My heart raced with the memory of the forged lease hidden in the folder under my bills. It was evidence, proof, but evidence meant nothing if I never used it. When I finally stepped out of the car, Alina greeted me on the porch, her smile broad and fixed, the baby balanced against her shoulder. Her tone was sickeningly sweet. "We got a head start today," she said. "Miguel thought it would be easier if we moved the bigger pieces now." I stared past her into my living room. A couch I did not own sat in the corner. A crib leaned against the wall, half assembled. Boxes were stacked high against the far wall, cutting into the space where my bookshelves used to breathe. It was my home, but it already looked like a stranger's. I felt my voice rise in my throat before I could stop it. "You cannot just come in here." Alina rocked the baby gently, her smile never faltering. "Kayla, it is already settled." Miguel explained everything. "We have the paperwork. The paperwork." Miguel appeared then, stepping into the doorway with a box under his arm. He gave me a look that was both casual and daring. "You should relax," he said. "This will work out better for everyone." I felt something in me snap. For so long I had swallowed my protests, let their words twist mine into selfishness. But this was too far. This was theft dressed up as family obligation. I pulled the folder from my bag, where I had started carrying the lease everywhere like a talisman. I held it up, my hands shaking. "This," I said, my voice low but steady, "is a forgery." Miguel did not flinch. He set the box down and shrugged as if the truth were irrelevant. "Mom said it was fine," he replied. The words hit me harder than the lease itself. Mom said, as if Isabel's approval was law, stronger than any contract, heavier than my own voice. That was the moment I pulled out my phone and dialed. The numbers felt heavy beneath my fingers, but I pressed them anyway. The line clicked and an operator's voice came through. 911, what is your emergency?" My chest trembled as I answered. "My family has broken into my house," I said. "They forged a lease and are trying to take it." The operator's calm voice guided me through the rest. "Stay outside if you can. Officers are on the way." I stepped back onto the porch, clutching the phone to my ear. Miguel followed, his face tightening, but Alina placed a hand on his arm. "Let us not make this worse," she whispered. Minutes later, the flashing lights of a patrol car cut through the night. 2 officers stepped out, their presence grounding me in a way I had not expected. I led them to the porch, my voice steadying as I told the story. How I had come home to find them inside. How I had discovered the lease with a forged signature. How they had moved furniture into my living room without permission. Miguel tried to interrupt, waving the lease he had pulled from the drawer. "Look," he said, "we have the contract." The officer took it, studying the signature, then turned to me. "Do you have identification?" I handed him my license, my fingers trembling. The officer held it against the paper, comparing the letters. He pointed at the crooked loops, the slanted lines, the misspelled middle name. "This is not the same handwriting," he said firmly. Miguel's face paled, but Alina jumped in quickly, her voice laced with urgency. "We did it for the children," she said. "They need space. Kayla has plenty. It is just until we get settled." Her performance might have swayed neighbors or friends, but the officer's face did not soften. He pointed to the door where the lock had been drilled out, the old knob tossed aside on the porch. "Did you do this?" he asked. Silence stretched. Miguel shifted uncomfortably. Isabel stepped forward then, her back straight, her chin high. "My daughter agreed," she said, her voice sharp with conviction. "She told us we could come." The officer turned to me. "Is that true?" I shook my head slowly, holding his gaze. "No, I never agreed to anything." The air seemed to thicken around us. For the first time, Isabel's face cracked, her jaw clenching in anger. Miguel opened his mouth, but no words came. Alina tried again, her tone growing desperate. "Please, think of the kids." But I had already made my choice. I looked at the officer, my voice clear. "This is not a misunderstanding. This is trespassing. And that lease is fraud." The officer nodded and told Miguel and Alina to step outside. The officers guided Miguel and Alina onto the porch while the children huddled inside, restless and confused. Isabel hovered at the doorway, her face drawn tight, her eyes flicking between me and the officers as though trying to decide which of us was the real enemy. Robert remained in the living room, sunk into a chair, his hands folded in his lap as if the world around him had nothing to do with him at all. The taller officer turned to Miguel and spoke in a tone that brooked no argument. "Sir, you need to leave the property." Miguel's mouth opened, then closed again. His usual bravado had drained from him, leaving behind a thin layer of irritation and disbelief. But he still tried. "Look, this is just a family misunderstanding," he said, his voice rising with forced confidence. "My sister always makes things sound worse than they are." I stepped forward then, holding the forged lease in my hands. "This is not a misunderstanding," I said. "This is a crime." The shorter officer asked me to explain once more. I described the moment I found the moving truck, the way I discovered the lease, the drilled-out lock. I handed him the broken brass knob still sitting on the porch. He studied it, then looked back at Miguel. "Did you replace this lock?" Miguel swallowed hard, his silence answering for him. Alina clutched the baby tighter, rocking back and forth as if performance alone could soften the scene. "Please, officer," she said, her voice trembling with carefully manufactured tears. "We did this for the children. You have to understand. My sister has so much space. We have so little." The taller officer's face remained stern. "Ma'am, that does not give you the right to break into someone's home." For the first time, Alina's smile faltered. She looked at Miguel, searching for rescue, but he stared at the ground. Then Isabel stepped forward, her posture perfect, her voice ringing with practiced authority. "My daughter is being cruel," she declared. "She knows family comes first. She agreed to this, even if she will not admit it now." I turned to her slowly, the weight of every childhood memory pressing down on me. The birthdays forgotten, the punishments for crimes I did not commit, the nights when my bruises were hidden so Miguel's future could shine untarnished. I held the forged lease high, my voice steady for the first time in days. "This is not just a lie," I said. "This is fraud. And if anyone tries to walk back into this house again like they own it, I will press charges." Silence spread like a crack in glass. Isabel's jaw tightened, her nostrils flaring, but she said nothing. Miguel shifted his weight, his fists clenching at his sides. Alina's tears slipped, but they looked more like frustration than grief. Robert finally rose from his chair, his eyes tired but still avoiding mine. The taller officer cleared his throat. "Everyone who does not live here needs to leave immediately." The words struck like a gavel. Miguel muttered under his breath. Alina adjusted the baby's blanket. Isabel shook her head as if betrayed by the world itself. Robert stood quietly by the door, his silence the same shield it had always been. As they gathered their things, Isabel turned on me one last time. "You are being cruel," she hissed, her eyes sharp enough to cut. I met her gaze without flinching. "No," I said, "I am being clear." For a moment, something flickered across her face, a mix of anger and disbelief, as though she had never imagined her daughter could stand so firmly against her. Then she turned sharply, her heels clicking against the porch as she walked away. Miguel followed, carrying a box he had not bothered to unpack. Alina trailed behind, whispering to the baby, her tears drying quickly in the night air. Robert was last, his voice barely audible as he mumbled "Merry Christmas" even though it was only October. It did not sound like he meant it. When the door closed behind them, I felt a rush of relief so strong it made me dizzy. I leaned against the wall, my breath shallow, the forged lease still clutched in my hands. The officers gave me a few final instructions, advising me to change the locks again, to keep records of everything, to call immediately if they returned. I nodded numbly, thanking them as they left. When the flashing lights faded down the street, silence wrapped around the house once more. But this time it was a different kind of silence. Not dread, not devastation, something closer to possibility. I walked through each room, picking up the toys and scraps they had left behind. Each piece felt like evidence of their intrusion, small reminders that they had tried to overwrite my life with theirs. I stacked the items neatly in a box and carried it to the porch, leaving it there for them to collect if they dared return. Inside, I sat at the kitchen table with the forged lease in front of me. I studied every crooked letter of my name, every false loop, every slanted line. For years they had rewritten my story, told me who I was and who I was not. But this was different. This was tangible proof of their deceit, and I would not let it vanish into silence. For the first time since they arrived, I felt the stirrings of strength. I had stood my ground. I had said no, and the world had not ended. The house was still standing, and so was I that night I turned off the porch light before bed. The darkness outside felt solid, protective. I whispered to myself that I had won a battle, though I knew the war was not over. People like them never left with the door closed. They always left it ajar, waiting to come back. But tonight, the house was mine again. And that was enough. December crept in slowly, layering the town with frost that clung to windows and rooftops. My house smelled faintly of cinnamon from the candles I had bought at the corner store, their flames soft against the winter dark. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. The memory of the confrontation still lingered like smoke, but the quiet afterward felt earned. I decided to host Christmas. It sounded reckless at first, almost absurd, but the idea grew on me. I had not spent a holiday surrounded by laughter and warmth in years. Most of my adult life had been marked by quiet evenings, sometimes in borrowed apartments, sometimes in the back of that battered RV. Holidays were just another day to get through. But this year, with a roof that was mine and walls that carried only my name, I wanted to fill the house with people who chose me. I reached out to cousins I had not seen in years, the ones who had drifted away when my side of the family fractured. To my surprise, they answered quickly, their excitement bubbling through the phone. An uncle offered to bring folding chairs. A college friend promised a pie recipe that had always burned but never failed to make people laugh. One cousin asked if they could crash overnight, curious to see the infamous RV I used to live in. The thought of that camper being used for sleepovers instead of survival made me smile for the first time in days. As the weeks ticked by, I filled the house with small preparations. I strung lights across the porch, their glow warming the darkness. I borrowed extra plates from a neighbor who seemed delighted to help. I even dragged a second-hand tree into the living room, its branches stubborn, but charming once I had coaxed them into shape. Every small act was a declaration. This house was alive, and it belonged to me. On Christmas Eve, the first car pulled into the driveway just as dusk settled. My cousin Maria stepped out with a tray of cookies and a wide grin, her children racing ahead to knock on the door. Soon after came my Uncle James carrying a stack of folding chairs under one arm and a scratched CD case in the other. He waved it proudly. No Christmas without Nat King Cole, he announced. Laughter filled the house quickly, warm and chaotic. People I had not seen in years hugged me as if no time had passed. They commented on the house, not with judgment but with genuine admiration. "It feels like you," one cousin said, and my throat tightened at the simple kindness. By 7 o'clock, the living room was packed. Chairs circled the tree, tables groaned under homemade food, and the scratched CD spun in an old player, filling the air with music that crackled but never wavered. Someone opened a bottle of wine. Someone else set out mismatched cups. Conversation overlapped in every corner, voices rising and falling with comfort and ease. I stood in the kitchen doorway watching it all, my chest swelling with a kind of gratitude I had almost forgotten was possible. This was family, I thought. Not the kind bound by blood and obligation, but the kind built on respect and choice. These people had driven hours through winter roads just to be here. They had brought food, laughter, stories. They had brought themselves without demand or expectation. For a while, I let myself believe the night would pass without shadows. I set out more plates, poured more wine, laughed at the stories I had missed. I let the music wash over me, soft and nostalgic. The air felt safe, the house vibrant, the fear of the last few months dimming into the background. But safety is fragile and shadows have a way of finding their way back. Around 8, as the laughter peaked and music filled every corner, the door opened. No knock, no call, just the creak of hinges and the rush of cold air. They stood there, framed by the doorway. Isabel first, holding a tray of store-bought cookies like an offering. Robert behind her, his shoulders stiff, eyes already downcast. Miguel entered next, his hands raised in mock surrender, his voice loud with false cheer. "Merry Christmas," he said, as though the night belonged to him. Elena followed, dressed carefully, her perfume clinging to the air, her lips pressed into that permanent pout that masqueraded as a smile. The room froze. Chairs creaked as people shifted. My cousin Emily crossed her arms, her jaw tightening. Uncle James set down his cup slowly, his eyes never leaving Isabel. The music kept playing for a moment, Nat King Cole's voice spilling awkwardly into the silence until someone hurried to stop it. I stood rooted to the spot, my heart thundering. I had not told them the time of the gathering. I had not invited them. And yet here they were, stepping into the warmth like it was theirs to claim. "Merry Christmas," Isabel said, her tone dripping with rehearsed sincerity. "We came to make amends." The words hovered in the air like smoke, fragile and suffocating. No one moved. No one spoke. My hands clenched at my sides, but I did not answer. It was Uncle James who finally broke the silence. "You were not invited," he said, his voice calm but firm. Isabel's smile did not falter. "We are family," she replied smoothly. "We belong here." But the certainty in her tone only made the room colder. The air inside the house grew heavy, so heavy that even the children who had been laughing moments ago fell silent. Isabel set her tray of cookies on the counter as though that simple act could erase the past. Robert muttered a low greeting, his eyes fixed firmly on the floor. Miguel moved further into the room, his gaze sweeping across the guests with the arrogance of someone entering his own domain. Elena trailed behind, adjusting her scarf, her smile strained but determined. I could feel every eye in the room flicking between me and them, waiting. My chest tightened, my palms damp. I wanted to tell them to leave, to slam the door in their faces, but the words stuck in my throat. Emily rose from her chair, arms crossed. She was younger than me but taller, her presence commanding in a way mine had never been allowed to be. Her voice cut through the silence. "You cannot just walk in here." Isabel turned her smile on Emily, but it did not reach her eyes. "We came to be together," she said softly, as if speaking to a child. "Tonight is about family." "No," James said firmly from across the room. "You came to be seen. That is different." The words stung even me, sharp with truth. Isabel blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. Elena stepped forward quickly, her voice rising with urgency. "It is not like that," she insisted. "We just need space. The kids have been so cramped. We thought maybe Kayla could understand." Her voice cracked, and suddenly the performance shifted. Tears welled in her eyes as she sank into one of the chairs, her hands covering her face. Her sobs came loud and desperate, filling the silence like sirens. "It is not fair," she cried. "Not fair that a woman with 4 kids has to live in a crowded house while someone with none gets all this." I stood rigid, every muscle locked. Her words burned through me, twisted with guilt and accusation. My chest ached with the old reflex to apologize, to yield, to make space. Elena looked up then, her face streaked with tears, her voice trembling. "You do not even have a family, Kayla, and we do." Behind her, Miguel shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the floor. Isabel opened her mouth, ready to defend, but she never got the chance. It was my Aunt Lucia who spoke next, her voice sharp and unwavering. "You had a family," she said, her eyes locked on Isabel. "You had 2 children, and you chose to erase one." The room went still. Isabel's face froze, the practiced smile crumbling. Aunt Lucia stepped forward, her words cutting through the air like glass. "When Kayla needed you, you turned away. When she asked for help, you laughed. You pushed her out so you could hold Miguel closer. And now, when she has built something of her own, you come with cookies as if that will wash away the years." No one moved. The words settled over us like snow, quiet but unshakable. Uncle James leaned forward, his voice low but steady. "You tried to steal her house. That is not a misunderstanding. That is theft." Miguel flinched as though struck. His mouth opened, but no words came. Elena sobbed louder, rocking in the chair. Robert shifted in the doorway, his face pale, but still he said nothing. Then, from the back hallway, another voice rose. Quieter than the rest, fragile but firm. My grandmother, her frame small, her voice almost trembling. "I saw the lease," she said. "I saw the broken lock. I saw the photos from the years you left her out." Her eyes found mine then, soft and steady. "You do not owe them forgiveness." Something inside me broke free at those words. I felt the weight of decades loosen, the chains of silence splinter. For the first time, someone in the family had spoken the truth out loud. And it was not me alone. I nodded once, my throat too tight for words. Isabel's face hardened, her eyes sharp with fury she could no longer disguise. She turned away quickly, her voice brittle. "Come on," she snapped at Miguel and Alina. "We are leaving." Alina wiped her face with the back of her hand, her sobs tapering into silence. Miguel gathered his coat without looking at anyone. Robert lingered at the door, his lips moving around the familiar phrase, "Merry Christmas," but it was hollow, brittle, nothing more than habit. They left in silence, the door closing behind them with a thud that felt final. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the soft hum of the heater kicking on. Then slowly, the room began to breathe again. Someone turned the music back on, tentative at first, then louder as laughter returned in small ripples. Plates were passed again, napkins refolded, glasses refilled. I stepped outside onto the porch, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. The night air was sharp, stars faint above the dark rooftops. Behind me, the house glowed with light and warmth, voices rising in harmony. For once, it felt like home in the truest sense. I glanced toward the RV at the edge of the yard. A cousin had claimed it for the night, curious to see how I had once lived. I saw the curtain drawn back slightly, the outline of a folded quilt on the bench. It looked almost cozy in a way it had never been for me. For them, it was adventure. For me, it had been survival. I let the cold air sting my cheeks as I whispered to myself, "They can say I do not have a family, but tonight proved them wrong. 10 people had driven hours to be here. 10 people had chosen me." I turned back toward the house, its windows glowing like lanterns in the night. My chest filled with something I had not felt in years, belonging. And for the first time, I knew I did not need the approval of those who had tried to erase me. I already had all the family I needed. The night after Christmas Eve should have brought calm. I should have woken to the soft glow of lights and the lingering smell of cinnamon pie, to the quiet murmur of cousins sleeping on the living room floor and friends laughing softly in the kitchen. And for a few hours, I did. The house was alive with the kind of chaos that felt safe, the kind that came from people who respected the walls they were in. But peace does not last long when shadows are still lurking outside. 2 days after the gathering, I found Isabel standing on my porch again. No warning, no call. She held a paper bag as though it contained some kind of peace offering. Her lips pressed into that familiar smile, but her eyes burned with something colder. I hesitated before opening the door, my chest tightening with dread. She wasted no time once she stepped inside. "You embarrassed us," she said flatly, placing the bag on the counter without looking at me. I blinked, stunned by her bluntness. "Embarrassed you? You tried to take my home." She turned toward me then, her expression sharp, the mask of motherly warmth gone. "You could have handled it quietly, Kayla. You could have let Miguel stay without involving the police." My anger flared, but before I could answer, she leaned closer, her voice lowering into a hiss. "Do you think this house is really yours? Do you think you built this life alone?" I froze. Her words cut deeper than I expected. "What do you mean?" Her smile returned, brittle and cruel. "I told Miguel where you lived." I told him it was time. The room tilted around me. My stomach dropped as her confession sank in. She had orchestrated it. Not Miguel, not Alina fumbling with fake paperwork. Isabel, my mother. I whispered the question even though I already knew the answer. "You told him to forge the lease." Her eyes glittered. "I told him to do whatever it took. This house belongs to family, not just to you." The weight of her words crashed down, shattering the story I had told myself for months. I had blamed Miguel for being greedy, Alina for being manipulative, Robert for being silent. But Isabel had been behind it all. She had sent them to my door. She had approved the forgery. She had orchestrated the invasion the way she had orchestrated every moment of my childhood, Miguel triumphant, Kayla diminished. I felt my body tremble with fury. All those years I had thought she was blind to the way she favored him. All those years I had convinced myself she simply did not know the harm she caused. But she had known, she had chosen it. "Why?" I whispered. "Why would you do this?" Her face hardened, the mask of affection gone completely now. "Because Miguel is the one who will carry us forward. He has children, he has a future." "You," her gaze swept across me, dismissive, cutting. "You were always temporary." The words hit like a physical blow. My breath caught, my throat burning. Temporary. I had been temporary in her eyes from the very beginning. Useful only until Miguel needed more space, more attention, more room. I thought of every night in the RV, every job I had scraped together, every penny I had saved for this house. I thought of the bruises I had hidden, the meals I had skipped, the celebrations I had missed. And now she stood in front of me, telling me none of it mattered because I was not the child she had chosen. Something inside me cracked, but instead of breaking, it solidified. No, I said, my voice shaking but firm. This house is mine. My life is mine, and you will never take it from me. Her jaw tightened. She leaned closer, her voice dripping with venom. You think you can stand against me? You think you can erase family? I straightened my shoulders, meeting her gaze without flinching. I am not erasing family. I am choosing mine. For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker in her eyes. She turned sharply, grabbing the bag from the counter, and stormed out without another word. The door slammed behind her, the sound echoing through the house like thunder. I stood in the silence, my hands trembling, my chest heaving. The truth settled heavy inside me. Miguel had been the weapon, Elena the accomplice, Robert the shadow. But Isabel had been the hand holding the blade all along. And now I knew. The battle was no longer about keeping Miguel out. It was about severing myself from the woman who had shaped my childhood with cruelty disguised as care. The realization terrified me, but it also freed me. The silence after she left was almost unbearable. It pressed against the walls, seeped into the floorboards, and echoed in the hollow of my chest. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the spot where she had stood, her words replaying over and over. Temporary. Always temporary. The house that had once felt like a fortress now felt like a battlefield, every corner heavy with the weight of her betrayal. My hands shook as I pulled the forged lease back from the folder, spreading it flat on the table. The crooked loops, the misspelled middle name, they were evidence, yes, but now they were more than that. They were a confession written in ink, proof of my mother's hand in shaping the crime. For hours I sat there, unable to move. Memories surfaced uninvited, sharp, and relentless. Isabel's voice telling me to give Miguel the bigger piece of cake. Her hand pushing me toward chores while he played outside. The way she looked past me at every family gathering, her smile bright only when it landed on him. And now, the ultimate betrayal, orchestrating the theft of the only thing I had built for myself. But something had shifted inside me during that confrontation. For the first time, I did not feel like the child she had molded into silence. I felt like someone else, someone older, someone stronger, someone who had survived too much to keep bowing. I made a decision. The next morning, I called my grandmother. My voice trembled, but I told her everything, the forged lease, the drilled-out lock, the police, and finally, Isabel's confession. There was a pause on the other end, long and heavy. Then her voice came, soft but fierce. I believe you, Kayla, I always have. The words washed over me like balm. I had braced for doubt, for dismissal, but instead I heard belief. For the first time, I felt the cracks in Isabel's narrative spreading wider. She had controlled the story for so long, but now the truth was seeping out. Grandma promised she would come by the house that evening. When she arrived, she brought a stack of old photographs tucked neatly into a worn envelope. We sat at the table as she spread them out, pictures of birthdays, school events, family holidays. In every photo, Miguel was centered, smiling wide, gifts piled high in front of him. And me blurred at the edge, holding a plate, cleaning the table, half hidden in shadow. Do you see, Grandma whispered. It was always there. She chose him, but you survived it, and you are stronger because you had to. Tears burned my eyes, but I nodded. Seeing it laid out so clearly, proof that I had not imagined it, made me feel both shattered and vindicated. That night, as I walked Grandma to her car, I saw headlights pause at the end of the street. A van, Miguel's. It idled for a moment, then turned away. My skin prickled, but I stood tall on the porch until the darkness swallowed it. The following days were filled with quiet determination. I changed the locks again, upgraded the alarm system, and spoke with a lawyer recommended by one of my cousins. I handed over the forged lease, every photo of the broken lock, every message Elena had sent. The lawyer's eyebrows arched high, but her voice was steady. This is clear fraud. If they try again, we will not just call the police. We will prosecute. The word prosecute echoed in my mind, sharp and final. For years I had believed justice was something out of reach, a concept reserved for others. Now it was a possibility, tangible and waiting. When Isabel called again, her voice was clipped, her words measured. You do not have to take it this far, she warned. I swallowed hard before answering. I am already farther than you ever thought I could be. The line went silent, then clicked dead. That night I stood in the living room, staring at the tree still glittering with lights. The ornaments caught the glow, casting small reflections across the walls. The house felt alive again, humming with the energy of people who had chosen to be there on Christmas Eve. I realized then that the revelation of Isabel's betrayal was not just about the past. It was about the future. For the first time in my life, I saw a path forward that did not require her approval, her presence, or her permission. The truth had cut me open, yes, but it had also set me free. I whispered into the quiet, the words tasting strange but solid on my tongue. I am not temporary, and for the first time, I believed it.